good many additions, and some clearing up and finishing work on the courses were done during the war, mainly on the Valley course. The tavern on the Dunluce course, which was a wooden building in very bad state of repair, was rebuilt in brick on a larger scale and with a small veranda, and water has been piped into it. An approach for cars and car park to this halfway house were also laid out. A certain amount of play went on during the war, and the club had a number of American servicemen as visitors, including American Air Force personnel and technicians from Langford Lodge. But substantial development came to an end until towards the end of the war, when it became apparent that the club would have to vacate the old clubhouse in the town and the Triangle as soon as possible when the war was over. This move, however, was not possible until the new clubhouse was erected according to the plans already prepared and approved of, or some existing and suitable building acquired. No one knew when building would be possible, what prices would be like, or whether permits to build would be necessary or could be obtained. The outlook was therefore very uncertain when, towards the end of 1946, the only possible existing building, the Holyrood Hotel, situated beside the present Last Green, came on the market. There was said to be keen competition for this building, which had been first a boarding house, then a school and finally a hotel, but I could not find out the strength or nature of this competition. The club, however, authorised the council to purchase it at £18,000, including the furniture. In my time, the club had been offered this building twice for £1,500, and we'd gone over it with an architect who had condemned it on several grounds, the chief ones being that the flat roof on the east end was rotten, and the fabric generally in bad repair. In addition, the interior was split up into a number of very small bedrooms and a lounge and dining room, but it did not look even remotely like a clubhouse. The west end of the building is old and appears on the earliest ordnance sheet, but I remember the 3-storey section being built sometime about 1900. I opposed the purchase on the ground that the building was defective, the site too far from Portrush and the price excessive. The owner had paid £1,700 for the building and had no doubt considerably improved it, but it was still a very poor building, both inside and outside, and I thought it would be impossible to make it into a satisfactory clubhouse. I had some experience of converted clubhouses and had never seen one which I thought was first class, and I thought that, as we had taken a good deal of trouble to prepare plans for a new clubhouse in which all requirements were fully provided for, it would be better to wait until circumstances allowed us to build it. We were secure in the old clubhouse until 1969, but as things turned out, we would have had to wait till 1955 for permission to build and would have lost 10 years of development, and have had to build in a period of inflation at very high prices, in addition to losing the payment of the sum agreed on with Lord Antrim for vacating the Triangle. The purchase was completed and most of the furniture sold for £3,000, so that the building cost the club £15,000 and a further sum of about £1,000 for some minor adaptations and removal. It was suggested that this might be a temporary home, but I was quite sure that, once purchased, there could be no retreat or further change in any foreseeable future, and this has now been made clear by subsequent events. When the club took possession, some advantages of the new position began to make themselves felt. The good level approach and grounds are very convenient, and there are ample parking facilities. The finish of the Dunluce course is improved by having the 2 last holes running parallel, so that the wind is never with or against them both, and the tavern is again a halfway house at the 9th hole. Moreover, the 2 halves of the course are better balanced, and it is impossible to say which is more difficult, as under normal circumstances they are both the same length. Another matter not to be overlooked is that this was the only building and land on the sand dunes from Portrush the White Rocks not already in possession of the club. Against this must be set the fact that the Dunluce and Valley courses were designed to start and finish adjacent to the Ladies and Rathmore clubhouses, and this makes it awkward for members of the men's club who object to walking a quarter of a mile to the first tee, and the greater distance of the clubhouse from Portrush has also come in for criticism, though it makes for greater privacy and does not appear to have any serious effect on the membership or use of the club. The clubhouse itself, nevertheless, was at first a very doubtful proposition. It proved to be uncomfortable inside and disreputable looking, leaky and generally defective outside. Then in 1950, the Royal and Ancient asked the club to take the Open Championship in 1951, and as this was a national event, we got a permit to do certain alterations to the inside of the clubhouse. In carrying out these alterations, the club was fortunate in obtaining the assistance of Mr. Scott, one of the Ulster Transport Authority's staff of architects, and advised by him the council gave a lot of thought to its reconstruction, which is a major job. Mr. Scott prepared several plans as the work proceeded, and eventually he, in conjunction with the building committee, hit on the internal layout as it is today, with the main club room and bar upstairs, the hall shaped out of a small ground floor room, and in some passages, and the lounge and dining room reversed, to bring the latter in line with the kitchen. The old dining room was made into the billiards room, which had been in a wooden shed outside. A new permit had to be obtained for this extended scheme, which included a new roof on the 3-story section and a replanned locker room with a changing room, showers and a drying room. The hall was subscribed for as a memorial to members who had fallen in the 2 great world wars. We also received much valuable advice from Mr. John Rainey, contractor, who carried out the work, and a number of very important modifications in the plans were made with his assistance and advice as the work proceeded. A start was made in October 1950. The whole work was finished in time for the Open in 1951. It was an undoubted success, and a very surprising one to the building committee and council, no less than to the general body of members. It was favourably commented on when the Open was being played, and the most satisfactory opinions expressed to me personally were by 3 of the very best-known builders and contractors in Belfast, who all said full marks. Luck had a lot to do with this result, as no one knew when the reconstruction began how it would turn out. The clubhouse is now pretty adequate and convenient. It is easy to run and service, and if the dining room and kitchen were modernised, it would be about as good as the club could hope for. The reconstruction has been more successful than I thought possible, though perhaps I was prejudiced against it from the start. Its cost was about £4,000, which was paid off in 2 years through the efforts of council and the assistance and generosity of the members. During this post-war period, the club has assisted in some other developments which have added to the amenities of Portrush. The town players were reconstituted as the Rathmore Club, a subsidiary club having independent golfing status, and the parent club, with the consent of Lord Antrim, gave them a site for a clubhouse at a nominal rent. On this site they erected and fitted out a clubhouse themselves under the direction and with the assistance of Mr. Jackson Taggart. This was a very ambitious scheme. Its completion was a marvel of organisation and hard work, and a great credit to those who carried it through successfully. I am certain that this Rathmore Club has a very bright future, and that it will play a leading part in the development of the game in Portrush. The club, also with the consent of Lord Antrim, leased the area next to the gasworks to the Portrush Hockey Club for a playing pitch. This club was losing its old ground and is now secure on the Royal Portrush Golf Club's land with a practically perpetual tenure at a nominal rent, and this pitch and ground should someday be the best and most attractive in Ulster. When the club migrated to the Bushmills Road, it brought the old wooden buildings which housed the club's professional and caddy master and re-erected them on a not very elegant site adjacent to the new clubhouse. In 1953, a new starters room and shelter had been erected in brick on the first tee, with money bequeathed by the late Mr. Taylor, and it was decided to put up a new brick building to replace the old wooden ones and house the professional and caddy master alongside the shelter and beside the first tee. This was done again under the advice and supervision of Mr. Jackson Taggart, then captain of the club, and this building contains the professional showroom, workshop and office, a room for trolleys, caddy master's quarters and additional locker room. The whole building is centrally heated and is a great advance on anything the club has had heretofore. When the Open came to Portrush in 1951, both the Dunluce course and the reconstructed clubhouse stood up to the test remarkably well. I will recall just one comment by a very old friend of mine, whose name is known wherever the game is played. Mr. Bernard Darwin, golfing correspondent of the Times, wrote, "The first Open Championship ever to be held in Ireland was begun at Portrush yesterday, and I must, to my shame, confess that I have never before seen this grand course. It is truly magnificent, and Mr. H.S. Colt, who designed it, in its present form, has thereby built himself a monument more enduring than brass." This is very high praise and very reassuring, coming from such an authoritative source. And I was very sorry that Harry Colt, who died in that year, did not live to see or at least read of the success of the Portrush, in which he took a great deal more than a mere professional interest. And now, what about the future? It is impossible to say what is to be the future of the game. Our founders thought that it might only be a passing phase, but its long history in Scotland and its amazing development all over the world since the Royal Portrush Golf Club was founded in 1888 suggests that its appeal is congenital and universal, and if the future is bright, the Royal Portrush Club has certainly laid the foundation to enable it to take its place among the clubs with a worldwide appeal. I wrote these notes originally in 1942 at the request of George Nash, our General Secretary from 1931 until after the Second World War, who wanted them put on record. I have now brought the record up to date, and there are only a few other items that may perhaps be recalled. Prior to 1922, cattle grazed over the course and did no end of damage to the greens, bunkers and fairways. Under the lease from Mr. Rankin, the club was entitled to wire in certain areas between Hughie's and the Giant's Grave and the stable holes. This was done about 1923 and proved to be an economy as well as an improvement. Then I brought a rain gauge which Mr. Hassan, the caddy master, looked after from in or about 1927 to 1938, a period of 11 years, and it showed that Portrush is a dry place for Ireland, having a rainfall of from 28 to 30 inches per year, a result which occasions surprise in some circles. The old minute books of the club from 1888 were missing when I first began to inquire into the affairs of the club, but they were eventually recovered, along with the books of press cuttings and other records lodged in a safe in the club. Mr. D. McLaughlin had the minute books indexed, but this index has been lost and is not now forthcoming. There are still a number of improvements which will no doubt be done from time to time. Most of those connected with the courses will be found in the record and minutes of the Greens Committee, the most pressing being the laying on of water to all of the greens of both courses under pressure. And when this has been done, one of the dreams of the few enterprising spirits who carried the burden of the 20 hectic years from 1922 to 1942 will have come true. As I walk round the course now, and I think what the club were like in 1922, I cannot help remembering that when things were going badly and I was contemplating throwing up the sponge, Harry Colt said, "Never give in until you have got this thing through, for it is unique and in the end will be worth all the trouble you and your friends may be put to." This was sound advice, and today we have got an undertaking which gives great pleasure to a host of people, and which, I believe, will in days to come rank as one of the great golfing venues of the world. The continued prosperity and popularity of the golf club is of vital importance, socially and financially, to the town of Portrush, and I was always surprised by the poor support it got in general from local sources. But there is now a better appreciation of what the club means to the town. It is true that the greater part of the club's prosperity lies outside the town for administrative purposes, but it is a Portrush club, and it is a very important factor in the life of the town and bound to be of even greater consequence if its links and clubhouses are developed to the highest degree possible along the lines already adopted by Council. I may be permitted to express an opinion on two matters which I believe to be of some importance. We in Ulster are generally afraid of colour. In our buildings, in our dress, and in our gardens. But the Council has now brightened up the clubhouse, both inside and out, and I hope the efforts which have been made in this direction will be maintained and improved upon. As a generalisation, and subject to many notable exceptions, we do not attach enough importance to appearances. It is most important that the clubhouse surrounds and curtilage be kept neat and tidy, and the grass regularly mown, and a few simple shrubs and flowers to break the monotony. If there is too much garden, it is not properly looked after, and it should be planted to give as little trouble as possible. It is different on the courses. Here, quite a lot of planting could be done in places off the course itself, at the back of greens, and in more or less sheltered places and banks facing south or east. Gorse, sea buckthorn, fuchsia, rugosa roses will all grow well and fight for survival with the heavy grasses, bent and bracken. The two former will very often survive even in the most exposed places, and these shrubs all propagate and spread themselves by travelling underground. A good example of what can be done may be seen around the tavern, where I planted a few miserable slips which have grown into quite a shrubbery and make the landscape warmer and less bleak. Perhaps someone someday will take this landscape gardening up as a hobby, and I'm sure that with very little trouble most spectacular results could be obtained. I will end by repeating the emphatic advice of Harry Colt that a club should get the layout of its course settled and then stick to it. All improvements to individual holes will then adorn the general picture. Players like to find the course as they remember it, and on courses with highly individual holes like ours, they will ultimately come to be known by their names and not by their numbers, and so acquire even greater individuality and respect. Portrush has been changed so often that it is only just beginning to settle down, and it is improbable that any further changes could be an improvement on the present framework. Now that the clubhouse problem has been resolved, the rabbits exterminated, the fairways cleaned up with selective weed killer, and a water system just around the corner, both courses should soon be in a high state of perfection, and the Royal Portrush Golf Club will not have to go out into the highways and byways to look for members or support.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.